Good morning, my friends. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Mem Test, Yevamos 49, and we're going to start with the Mishnah on 49a. Says our Mishnah, Ezehu Mamzer. What is the definition of what creates a Mamzer? So a Mamzer, we know, is this person who is somebody who's not allowed to marry into the community. Now we're going to see in our Mishnah three positions about what creates a Mamzer. Well, the first position is Ezu Mamzer, Kol She'er Basar. She'er Basar means, this is Rashi's interpretation, anyone who's a relative, Shehu B'lo Yavo, who's included in a prohibition. Meaning to say, any prohibition which involves a relative is going to make a Mamzer, according to Rabbi Akiva. So, what's an example of that? Rashi says an example of that, Rashi says an example of that is according to Rabbi Yehuda, if a person is Boel, somebody who their father had a relationship with, but he wasn't married to her. So according to Rabbi Akiva, that creates a mamzer. Second position is Shimon HaTaimani Omer Kol Shechayev V'Malav Kares B'dei Shamayim. Shimon HaTaimani's position is anyone who violates what?
That he sees his father had Boel.
Well, so if you don't know, then you're at B'shogeg. But if you do know, but mamzer doesn't matter if it's B'shogeg, you would be a mamzer regardless. Right.
Mamzer gets it at the end.
How are you supposed to know? That's why the Gemara says earlier. The Gemara
usually, like that Abraham had his concubine, right? But let's say in a situation where
so the Gemara says it's a very good point. That's why the Gemara says earlier we said a person shouldn't have one wife on one side of the world and another wife on the other side of the world, because then you can end up being with a woman you're not supposed to. So yeah, you have to be very careful. And that's why we're going to see in the third case, it's going to maybe answer Rabbi Meir's question. You'll see when we get to that. Shimon HaTaimani says, Kol Shechayev V'Malav Kares B'dei Shamayim. Anything which comes from a union from which you would have received Kares penalty from heaven. V'alacha Kedvarav. And the law is like Shimon HaTaimani. That Kares comes from a penalty of that mamzer comes from penalty of kares. Rabbi Yeshua says, "Kol shechayavin olav misas bezin." Rabbi Yeshua says anything for which you get death by a court, which is we're going to see in a moment in the Mishnah. The Mishnah's example that is ishes ish, somebody who's with a married woman. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Azai matzati megillas yosin. So Meir asked the question, how is somebody supposed to know? So now we see how. They kept a Megillah scroll of lineage. So he says, I found in the Megillas Yochsin in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, they had a Megillas Yochsin, the Ksuvba, and it says in it, Ishponi Mamzer Me'ish Ish. That such and such a person was a Mamzer from a married woman. We see from here that the whole idea is that you're from a Mamzer from a if a man was with a married woman, that creates a mamzer, and that is a death penalty from the court, a person with a meishis ish. L'kayim divrei Rabbi Yeshua. That shows that Rabbi Yeshua's position is correct. Says the Gemara, Ishto Shemesa. The Mishnah continues. Ishto Shemesa. If his wife dies, mutar ba'chosa, then he's allowed to marry her sister. Garsha Umesa, let's say he divorced her and she died, mutar bachos, he's allowed to marry her sister. Nises la'achar Umesa, let's say she marries somebody else and then she dies, mutar bachos, he's allowed to marry her sister. Yevamos Shemesa, let's say it's her Yevama who dies, mutar bachosa. It's Yevama who dies, he's allowed to marry her sister. All these cases where the law is that you're married to a woman and once she dies, you can marry her sister. If he kind of did chalitza, which was like kind of divorce with her, and she died, mutar bachosa. He's allowed to marry her sister. Let's say his wife married another woman and then she died. Again, mutar b'achos, so you're allowed to marry her sister. So says the Gemara, my time of Rabbi Akiva. What's the reasoning behind Rabbi Akiva's position that any time it's a situation of a prohibition from the Torah of a relative, then the offspring is a mamzer? What's the reason? Because it states in the pasuk, "Yikach ishes aviv v'lo yigaleh kanaf aviv," and that's followed soon after that by "Lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem." It says you're not allowed to marry the wife of his father, not allowed to reveal the nakedness of his father, and then it becomes a mamzer. Kanaf shara aviv lo yigaleh. He says this refers to anybody who his father had been with, a kanaf, like a garment that his father had seen, meaning to say, even if his father didn't marry her, you're not allowed to reveal, you're not allowed to be with her. And then it says, creates a mamzer. He passes like Rabbi Yehuda says the verse is referring to the anusa of the father, his father's paramour, not his father's wife.
That's what I was
right. How are you supposed to know? Right. That is prohibited just by a prohibition. And right next to it, it states, right next to it states that the mamzer is not allowed to come into the community of God. So we see from here, Alma mehane have a mamzer. So we see from here that any one of these prohibitions creates a mamzer. Anyone that's just a regular prohibition of a relative creates a mamzer. That's how Rabbi Akiva learns it. Gemara says, but we know that there are other opinions about what Rabbi Akiva said. There was Rabbi Simai and Rabbi Yeshevav. And Rabbi Simai, the marba sharchai v'lavin, the lav dishe'er. Meaning to say Rabbi Simai's position was they don't even have to be relatives. They could be any prohibition of the Torah, like with the exception of a Kohen Gadol and a widow. But even, let's say a man remarries his divorced wife after she remarried somebody else. That is a prohibition from the Torah. So, but that, according to Rabbi Simai, Rabbi Akiva would also say creates a mamzer. According to the author of our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva says it's not a mamzer. But according to Rabbi Simai, it creates a mamzer. And how would Rabbi Akiva learn that out? And also, Rabbi Yeshevav demarba afilu chai ve'aseh. Rabbi Yeshevav says, Rabbi Akiva says that your mamzer, even if it's a lav haba mikol say, meaning it's a negative commandment that was written in the Torah as a positive commandment. For example, a third generation Mitzri you're allowed to marry, meaning to say ad dor shlishi yavo b'kal Hashem. Meaning to say, so if you marry before, it's a prohibition. So how do we know that if you marry an Egyptian, it creates this mamzer? According to Rabbi Yeshevav, so the Gemara says nafkalu mi velo. It says velo you go at kanaf. Why does it have to add the extra vav to teach us that they're also included in the prohibition? Shimon Atemani, so now the Gemara says, what's the position of Shimon Atemani? Several Rabbi Shimon Atemani, several Rabbanan, the Amri b'shomeres yavam shalav v'kasim medaber. Why does Shimon Atemani say that any kares penalty creates a mamzer? That it's only from a kares penalty, not from a regular prohibition, because he says he holds like the Rabbanan who say that this verse "Lo yigaleh kanaf aviv" is referring to the shomeres yavam, and they say when it says "Lo yigaleh kanaf aviv," that refers to if your father's brother has a wife and then he dies. Then that woman falls to yibum with your father, and then you're with that woman, and so that woman is a kares penalty for you. Why? Because she's your father's brother's wife, which is a kares penalty, and so therefore, it's to teach us that a mamzer comes from this union of a kares penalty. That's how Shimon Atemani says it. So now we have the third approach, Rabbi Yeshua. And why does Rabbi Yeshua say it's from any death by court only? Rabbi Yeshua, the Torah could have just written, Lo yigaleh kanaf aviv, Lo yikach Why does it need to say it both? Now, Rav Hachikamer is teaching us that from lo yikach until lo yigaway, that's the mamzer. Meaning, say lo yikach eshes aviv, eshes aviv. A man is not allowed to be with this married woman. That's a mamzer. Tefelo avi mamzer, but more than that is not a mamzer. So that's what Rabbi Yeshua says. Meaning, only if a man who's with a punishment by death from a court is a mamzer. Amar Abaye, so now we're in the bottom line of 49a. Abaye says, "Hakol modim biba alanida." Everybody would admit that if even Shimon HaTamari, who says that from every Kari's penalty creates a mamzer, he would say that if a person is with a nida woman, which is a Kari's penalty, if you're with a woman who doesn't go when she's menstruating, even though that's a Kari's penalty, nevertheless, the offspring is not a mamzer. Abaye says, "Hakol modim biba alanida." Everybody says that the offspring is a mamzer, and also the alasota, that the offspring. Everybody says that if you're with a nida, that the offspring is not a mamzer, and also the alasota. On top of 49b, everybody says if you're with a sota woman, that's also not a mamzer. So everybody's of these positions. What's the sota woman here? Rashi tells us, Ashes ish. This is the married woman who was adulterous, and such a woman is prohibited to be with her husband. And even though it's just a regular prohibition, meaning to say we're talking about a woman who was secluded. She wasn't, we don't know for sure she was actually adulterous. She was secluded and her husband warned her. And so there, such a person is a prohibition, just a regular prohibition. Nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva would admit that the offspring is not a mamzer. So everybody says, even the ones who say that Rabbi Akiva says that any prohibition is a mamzer, in this case, the offspring is not a mamzer. Why? Why is the offspring not a mamzer by a nida and by this sota woman? So nida da tavsebu kedushin, because there's this concept called tofes ba kedushin, that if you betroth somebody you're not supposed to, there's two categories, two things that can happen. One is the marriage is like, if you try to marry your sister, they would say it's just not a marriage, it's not binding. But let's say you try to remarry the woman who you had divorced, to remarry somebody in between, that's a prohibition and the marriage is binding. So too, the nida woman, you're not supposed to betroth her while she's a nida, but if you did, meaning you shouldn't be in that situation, but the marriage is binding. And that's why we have sometimes that people know that they're a nida, and they and nevertheless the marriage goes forward because it's okay if you have no choice, you have to do it. It's not the ideal, but anyway, we see from here nida da tasebu kedushin. So the marriage is binding even though you are betrothing a woman who was a nida, as it states vatehi nidasalav. It says the word vatehi nidasalav, which tells us that the marriage is binding with a nida woman. Utehi nidasa alav, and afil b'shas nidasa, even while she's a nida, tafsi ba kedushin. Her kedushin is binding. The betrothal is binding. And sota nami. Why also a sota woman? Now tafsi ba kedushin. Even after the woman is accused of being adulterous, she's still married to you. She's still married to you. So the kedushin is also binding with her. And Tanya nami achi, we learned takol modim. We have a brayz that supports this idea. Everybody agrees, but ba nida, ba sota, and now we have the third approach. The first two are from Abaye. Everybody agrees that the nida woman and the sota woman, that the offspring is not a mamzer, but now they add in the shomeres yavam. Also, if you're with somebody, shomeres yavam. What's the shomeres yavam? A woman who falls to yibum with a man, and she's waiting for this man to do yibum with her, and before he does yibum or chalitza, another man comes and he marries her. Everybody agrees then that the offspring is not a mamzer. Abaye, why doesn't Abaye include this category of the shomeres yavam? Why does Abaye not include it? Abaye was mesafkoe ikarav ikashmuel. And Rashi reminds us Abaye wasn't certain if the law was like Rav or Shmuel. Abaye tells us that this refers to a Gemara in Aisha Rabbah. What does the Gemara in Aisha Rabbah tell us in Tzadi Beis? That Rav is of the position that the offspring of a person with a Shemeres Yavram is indeed a mamzer, because the Kedushin is not binding in it, where Shmuel is not certain what's the law in that case. So therefore, Abai didn't include it because he wasn't sure if the law was like Rav, the offspring is a mamzer, and this brisa, or Shmuel says it's not a mamzer, who says maybe it's not, maybe it's a mamzer. So Rav Shimon Azi said, I found the Megillah Yochsin, and says this person was a married woman from was a mamzer because his father was with a married woman. So Rav Shimon Azi said, Matzasi Megillah Yochsin Yerushalayim. I found this scroll of lineage in Jerusalem. The Kosov and it wrote on it, Ishponi mamzer mi'ishasish. Such and such a person is a mamzer from a married woman. And what else did he found there? He found there Kosov Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kav and Naki. The second thing he found there was that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's teachings were Kav, which is small, Vinaki, and they were clean, like clean flour. And so therefore, wherever he mentions the halacha is like him. The commentaries explain Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is Kav and Naki. Kav means small, but they're always right. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the last two letters of his name are Yaakov, Kuf Bet. So that's probably why a pun, why they say Kav and Naki. But another reason is because his teachings, the number of teachings and positions he has in the Shas are 102, which is the gematria of Kav. That's what they say. I'm embarrassed to say that I forgot who said it, but that's the pshat. And the third thing that said in it was Kosova Menashe Ahara against Yeshaya. That King Menashe killed Isaiah the prophet. That was the third thing that was mentioned in it. And so how did this happen? Amarava Meidan Daine. That King Menashe was the king. He made a judgment on Isaiah. And he said Isaiah is contradicting the Torah. And so therefore he made a judgment upon him. Then Menashe said to Isaiah, Menashe said to Isaiah, Moshe Rabbi Amar Ki Lo Yirani Adam V'chai. Your Rabbi Moshe said nobody could see me and live. Meaning to say, nobody can see God. V'at Amris, and you Isaiah said, V'aras Hashem Yoshev Akisei Ramanisa. You Isaiah said, I will see God dwelling on the high throne. Akisei Ramanisa. Moshe Rabbi Amar Moshe, your Rabbi said, Mi Kashem Okena Mechol Kareinu Olav. Moshe, your Rabbi said, who was like Hashem? All those who call out to him, which implies Hashem is found at every time, whenever you call out to him. V'at omeret derishu Hashem imatzo. You say, seek out God when he can be found, which implies that there are times where he's found and times when he's not found, contradicting what Moshe Yerebbi said. Moshe Yerebbi said, the number of days I will fill. This implies that he completes the days of man, and he doesn't add on at all to man's lifetime once the number of days was determined. But you say, but you said this to Chizkiah Melech, I'll add on to you 15 years. What's this a reference to? The Gemara in Brachos, Daf Yomi tells us a story that Chizkiah Melech was getting very sick. He was about to die. Yeshai the prophet came over to him and he said he's dying because he never got married. So Chizkiah said the reason why he doesn't want to get married is because he saw a vision that his children were going to be wicked. So Isaiah said, don't deal with the nistaros, don't deal with the hidden things. You need to marry a woman. And he also said to him, Chizkiah said that Isaiah said to Chizkiah that you've already been decreed upon that you're going to die. So Chizkiah said then, I have a tradition from my father's home that even if the sword is on your neck, you should pray to God. And therefore Chizkiah prayed to God, and afterwards Hashem said to Isaiah, go tell Isaiah that I'm adding on 15 years onto your life. So we see Isaiah got extra years. So why are you contradicting? These are the three contradictions of Isaiah with Moshe Rabbeinu. So Menashe wanted to kill him. So Amar Yeshaya said, Yadana Beidlo Makabal Mada Imai. Isaiah said, I know that Menashe is not going to accept what I tell him. The Imai is really amazing. And if I tell him, I'm going to make him kill me with bemazed intentionally. So he didn't want to tell him anything because he wanted to protect the innocent. Although he wasn't really innocent, he wanted to protect him from being more guilty. Amar Shem and Ibwa Ba'arazah. So Isaiah said the name of God, and he was swallowed up by a cedar tree. Al-Siur Ba'arazah. They brought that tree that Isaiah was swallowed into, and they brought it to Menashe. How did Vinasrua, and they chopped up the tree. How did they know where Isaiah was in the tree? The Rishalmi tells us, a Gavaldika thing, that they could see the tzitzis of Isaiah peeking out from the tree. They could see the tzitzis of Isaiah peeking out from the tree. And that's so they knew that where that's how Menashe knew. So Kimato Ade Puma, when they came to Isaiah's mouth, Isaiah, then when they came to Isaiah's mouth, then Isaiah died. Mishum da'amar besoch am tamesi vasayim anochi yoshev, because Isaiah had said, I dwell amongst the people of tamei lips.
Oh, because he blamed the people.
Because he blamed the people. Meaning to say, Isaiah said, how can I see a vision of God? I'm dwelling amongst people of tamei lips. So that shows he blamed the people. So mikom makom, why was Isaiah contradicting these psukim? Varet Hashem Tanya. What did he say? I saw God, meaning to say, all the other people saw Moses, saw God. Moshe saw God through a looking glass that was clear. So he knew that you can't see God. But all the other prophets saw him through a looking glass that wasn't clear. So they thought they saw him. Ironically, the less you know, the more you think you know. It says, Dear Shua Hashem, so seek out God in places where he can be found. But the other verse says, I'm always found. One is by an individual, one is by a community. By community, God's always found. Individual, when is he found? God's found during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's even for an individual. The number of days where I shall fall, which, by the way, is the title of a great book by Barbara Meyerhoff about the elderly Jewish community in Venice. It's a great anthropological study. But when it says number of days I will fill, so it means your days are filled. You can't add on. How did Isaiah add on? Gemara says, Tanahi, the number of days I will fill. Elu Shane Doros. This refers to the years that are given to a person when he's born. Zacham, we're on top of Nun Amadal, 58. Zacham Ashlimilo, Lo Zacha Pochatimo. If the person merits, we give him more years. If the person does not merit, we take away his years. That's the position of Rabbi Akiva. Zacham Nosifim Lo. If he's meritorious, we add on to the words Lo Zacha Pochatimo. If he's not meritorious, we are going to diminish him. Amalo Rabbi Akiva Arei Omer Vosafti Al Yamecha. So Rabbi Akiva says it's all established. So the Chacham said to Rabbi Akiva, but it says that Isaiah said, God told Isaiah, go tell Chizkiyahu, I'm going to give you another 15 years. Amroham, he said, no, that's Mishalo Sifalo. No, that he added on from what Chizkiyahu already had. Because there was a prophet who was prophesying, Hined ben Noad based of it, Yoshioshmo, that he was already promised that he was going to have a descendant. To Yeravam was going to be a descendant, and who was that going to be? That was going to be Yoshio, Vadaylo Noah Menashe, and this was well before Menashe was born. So we see the prophecy predated Menashe. Rabbana Miksiv Michizkiyahu, if it doesn't say the child was going to be born to Chizkiyahu, it means to say it was going to be born to the house of David. It could have been from Chizkiah, it could have been from somebody else. Anyway, we see from here that if a person is meritorious, we add on to the years of his life. But Tosfos asked the question. Tosfos asked the question. Don't we know that your how long you live depends upon mazal, not on your stus? So the Gemara says, yeah, pshita deschus gadol model. Even though merits don't help, if you have a lot of merits, they do help. So
mazel is that the Cheskel never met Menashe. Yeah. He would have gotten it also.
So we say Isha Shamesa and Yevamos Shamesa. Why do we need all these examples? The Gemara says, "Amar Yosef Kan Shana Rabbi Mishnah." We don't technically talk. We don't need it. Rashi says the Zil Karbe Rafu Ale B'Chaye Shelo Nesra Achosa Ale B'Chaya. Everybody knows that what your wife's sister is only prohibited while she's alive. Everybody knows that she's not prohibited after your wife dies. So everybody knows it. So it's a Mishnah Shein Tzricha. It's not needed. So that's what Rashi says. So okay, Hadron Alachachoitz, Hadron Alachachoitz, and God willing, we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address.